Episode 1, the A-Level Germany Module, Part 1. Section 1, the establishment and early years of the Weimar Republic, 1918 to 1924. The impact of the Great War. In September 1918, General Ludendorff knew Germany was losing, so requested an armistice with the Allies to avoid a humiliating defeat. During the October reforms, Ludendorff advised the Kaiser to make reforms to the democracy in order to accept the 14 points from Wilson. This basically ended the Kaiser's rule. Prince Max Böden would appoint a chancellor who would be responsible for the Reichstag. He created a new government based on the majority of the parties, including the SPD. On the 3rd of October, Böden wrote to Wilson to ask for an armistice. Took weeks to reply. Wilson asked for Germany to leave all occupied territory, called for an end to submarine warfare, and fully democratized its political system. Evaluations. The October reforms were enacted to try and avoid or worsen the effects of a humiliating defeat. They were referred to as a revolution from above, as they did not come about due to popular demand or the main Democratic Party in the Reichstag. The peace note basically demanded Germany's surrender and marked an end to the Kaiser's rule. Ludendorff could not accept the terms and choice to flee Sweden, as he had failed to wage an effective war, as well as failing to gather support to challenge the peace deal forced upon Germany. This dealt a shattering blow to the German people. The peace note was an admission that Germany was losing the war, and consequently the Kaiser lost support and respect. Moreover, soldiers and sailors lost respect for their commanders and officers. The political crises of October and November 1918. On the 22nd of October, a workers' strike claimed that the Kaiser was a scoundrel and cried up with the German Republic. On the 28th of October, German Navy's High Command ordered its remaining warships to attack British ships in the English Channel. On the 3rd of November, sailors took control of the military port of Kiel. The idea spread to city workers and soldiers' councils were created. By the 6th of November, similar councils had spread across all Germany. On the 9th of November, the Social Democratic Party, the SPD, called on workers in Berlin to join the strikes. They threatened to withdraw support from Böden's government, who needed the speed to rule Germany. In desperate last move, Böden claimed that the Kaiser had abdicated. He resigned shortly afterwards and passed his job to Friedrich Ebert, the leader of the SPD. On the 9th of November, the Kaiser was given the news that his abdication had been announced in Berlin. He was forced to accept and left for neutral Holland. Evaluation. On the 28th of October, 2 cruisers refused to attack, which subconsciously marked the start of a bigger revolutionary movement. During the November Revolution, various soldier and worker councils were in favor of removing the Kaiser and aspired to establish a democratic Germany. On the 8th of November, the Bavarian monarchy was deposed and the state became a republic. The establishment of the Weimar Constitution. Ebert believed he could achieve change through winning a majority in parliamentary elections. He had come to power through revolutionary means and his government lacked legitimacy. He was desperate to establish a new constitution. On the 10th of November, Groener phoned Ebert to tell him the army would support Ebert. In return, Groener demanded that Ebert ignore the demands of the councils and that the army would be used to defend Germany from becoming a communist revolution. The Weimar Constitution extended the franchise to women and introduced proportional representation. This made sure small parties could get seats. It was set up outright to be a full democracy and would boast of having civil rights, referendums, a president, and a Reichsrat. However, the proliferation of small parties meant that nothing could get decided. Small parties used this to hinder votes and exploit the system, which, as well as coalition governments, meant that no one party could hold majority. This resulted in short-lived governments. As was the norm in the Second Empire, the army had been free from political control, which they didn't want to change. They also wanted to use all their military power against left-wing revolts. The right, in comparison, often had the support from the armed forces. In accordance with Article 54, those who had been judges before the Weimar remained in their posts once the Weimar Constitution was established. These were staunchly monarchist, anti-democratic, and often showed their bias in their legal judgments. Evaluation. Now that the German Republic existed, it was clear that the Kaiser, who had lost support, could not handle the army and therefore needed to resign. Ebert encouraged Germans to keep essential services running and avoid street demonstrations in a bid to maintain law and order. His authority did not extend much beyond Berlin, where street demonstrations led by ex-soldiers were the norm. The USPD party and the Spartakists saw an increase in their support. Ebert needed the support of the army, who were typically huge supporters of the Kaiser and opposed to democracy. The Ebert-Groener Pact was, and despite being necessary and unavoidable, perceived by the left as a betrayal of the revolution. This led to further revolutions. The commander-in-chief of the Heer, the German word for army, called Hans von Siegt, owed loyalty to the timeless Reich that showed German nationhood, not the Weimar Republic. Seeckt only allowed the army to get involved in politics when he said so, and they were not allowed to do so themselves. The Republic stated that anyone attempting to overthrow the constitution by force should be sentenced to imprisonment. The judiciary, however, punished the left wing with great severity, whilst the right wing were treated leniently. Part 2. The impact of the Versailles Settlement. On the 11th of November 1918, an agreement was reached to stop the fighting of the First World War. In January 1919, the Allies met to talk about the future. Germany was not invited to this meeting and was not allowed to view the terms until 7th of May. On the 16th of June, the Allies gave Germany only 7 days to accept the terms of the treaty. On the 28th of June, Germany accepted the treaty. However, Germany was not allowed to attend the conference. With regards to territorial issues, the Treaty of Versailles removed 13% of Germany's territory, as well as its overseas colonies, not to mention the Alsace-Lorraine, which was returned to France. Its African colonies were forfeited and handed over to the League of Nations. Similarly, Germany had to surrender all of its heavy weapons. It was forbidden from adopting or enforcing a mandatory conscription, and its army was limited to a force of 100,000 men. They were prevented from developing or using gas, armored fighting vehicles, and Air Force submarines, and was further handicapped by only being permitted a navy of 15,000 men and 6 battleships. In addition, Germany had to accept war guilt and was consequently forced to pay reparations, which were initially set at £6.6 billion. The Rhineland, including the left bank of the River Rhine and an adjacent 50-camp strip, had to be demilitarized. The Sauerland would be under the control of the League of Nations control for a grand total of 15 years, and Germany would be required to supply France, Belgium, and Italy with free coal. To top it all off, Austria was not allowed to unite with Germany. It was not allowed to join the League of Nations, and the Kaiser would be put on trial for war crimes. This resulted in the political crisis of 1919, as all parties agreed that an acceptance of the treaty would be incompatible with German honor. Evaluation. Different political divisions objected to the agreement of the treaty, even though the German war machine was exhausted and ill-equipped to continue waging war. Germany denied national self-determination, which was laid down in Wilson's 14 points. The war guilt clause was perceived as unjust, humiliating, and the reparations would cripple German economy. Therefore, there was an argument that by not accepting war guilt, there would be no need to pay reparations. This was on top of disarmament and Germany's exclusion from League of Nations, which was again viewed as unjust. Political impact. The SPD party thought that Germany only had one choice, namely that they had to accept the treaty. The army and General Hindenburg thought about rejecting the treaty. Ebert stated that he would reject the treaty if Groener could provide an alternative way of leaving the war. Groener said there was no alternative, however. Some pro-Republican parties turned against the Weimar. With regards to the right wing, however, not all returning soldiers were hostile to the Republic, as many were in favor of the Republic. Some elected to join the Free Corps movement, and so it was that democratic parties were under a more continuous threat from nationalist parties. Part 3. Economic and Social Problems in Germany, 1923 to 1924. Economic problems. Germany decided to pay for the war through increased borrowing and the printing of more money. By 1919, Germany had a debt of 1.44 billion marks. They could not increase taxes, however, out of fear of political instability. By 1921, unemployment was virtually gone at 1.8%. The economy was strong, unlike other European countries, and inflation was unfortunately still increasing. By 1923, inflation was as out of control, which concluded with the hyperinflation crisis. When the Ruhr was invaded by French and Belgian forces in 1923, Germany lost its most important industrial sector because France and its allies wanted to force the payment of reparations. They wanted to accomplish this by having complete control of the Ruhr's production facilities. Germany responded through passive resistance. 132 Germans were shot, however, and so the French brought in their own workers. Social problems. Protesters from the 1918 November Revolution were motivated by a desire for a better and more free life. The new Weimar Constitution brought about new social welfare changes. In 1919, an atypical working day was limited to 8 hours, and new state health insurance, which would extend to wives, daughters, and even the disabled, was introduced. Aid would be given to veterans who had received wartime injuries, which would supplement aid for war widows and orphans. In 1922, the National Youth Welfare Act led to greater child protection and gave them the right to an education. However, due to hyperinflation, money needed to be collected in wheelbarrows, and gangs of city dwellers traveled to the countryside to steal goods. Bartering also increased, and there was a rise in the number of convicts. Evaluation. A 1920 coalition, which was supported by industrialists, benefited from inflation through the taking of short-term loans, which let them expand their businesses. In this way, it can be argued that inflation was beneficial for Germany. By 1922, Germany had to ask for a postponement of reparations in both January and February, and again in July. In November, they had no choice but to ask for a loan. This annoyed France. The impact of the occupation was strongly felt as the payment of wages to who were instrumental for passive resistance was a further drain on economy. Germany had to import coal, and a shortage of goods increased their prices. For example, bread in January 1923 cost 163 marks. In October 1923, it cost 9 million marks, and by November it cost 233 billion marks. Black marketers sold their food stocks for profit. Debts were paid off in worthless currencies. Foreigners living in Germany had access to comparative enormous wealth. Food was in demand, and money was less important in the countryside, benefiting farmers. Pensioners and those who bought war bonds, as well as landlords, unskilled trade workers, artisans, and small business owners lost out enormously. The Mittelstand, the sick, and children also lost out, and disease and starvation became more normalized. Part 4. Political instability and extremism, 1919 to 1924. The left wing. On the 5th of January 1919, Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht overthrow Ebert. Demobilized soldiers found it hard to adjust to civilian life. The German Communist Party, otherwise known as the KPD, had minority support, which was mainly limited to industrial areas. They were determined to have a revolution, but did not have the support to do so. In March 1919, there was a Spartakist uprising in Bavaria. In April 1919, strikes occurred in industrial areas as laborers wanted more freedom over their work. In 1920, and after defeating the Kapp Putsch, workers helped form the German Red Army, who took control of Ruhr. In March 1921, a key revolution was crushed by the police. The right wing. The right wing was hostile to the Republic and did not believe in democracy. They believed it betrayed the fatherland. Some wanted to restore to monarchy, while some wanted to from a dictatorship. This weakened their ability to hold a successful right-wing revolution. The Treaty of Versailles meant that the Army and Free Corps had to be disbanded. Even after the treaty was accepted, an additional 2 sections of the Free Corps was asked to disband. General Luttwitz refused to do this, and his arrest was ordered. Luttwitz decided to help launch a protest in Berlin, which gained support from the Wolfgang Kapp. Ludendorff, however, refused to openly voice support. This event was dubbed the 1920 Kapp Putsch. Before he launched the 1923 Beer Hall Putsch, Hitler knew that he needed the support of powerful people. This is why he pressed for the support of Ludendorff, and is why he needed Kehr and Lossow. On the 8th of November, he and the Nazis burst into a beer hall and surrounded it with Sayers soldiers. They wanted this to earmark the start of the revolution. The aim was that the revolution would spread to Berlin. In spite of this support, dropped overnight. Evaluation. The left was poorly organized and had poor support. Ebert needed the army to crush the revolution, which ended on the 13th January. The leaders of the revolt were executed, which, as well as Ebert's brutality, not to mention the way he crushed the revolt, deepened the divisions on the left. When Ebert called for a general strike, Berlin was in a standstill. 4 days later, the right-wing Kapp Putsch was stopped. This showed that the army could not be trusted, as well as that civil servants were not loyal without the army's backing. This showed that the Weimar was weak. The Ruhr invasion sparked anti-French feelings, and many blamed the government for what happened. Support amongst the middle class for the Weimar was damaged, which was a contributing factor in the formation of the National Socialist German Workers' Party. The Beer Hall Putsch ultimately failed. Hitler decided to go ahead with his march through Munich, where the Nazis were shot, leading to Hitler running, though being arrested. Ludendorff surrendered. This showed the importance of the army as a force for political stability. The Nazis were banned and Hitler was put in prison. Most importantly, the Republic had survived